Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the webinar. We're glad you all are here today. We want to give everybody a little bit of time to get into the webinar. So we will go over some housekeeping first. Just want to let y'all know that during the presentation, we will not be able to see or hear you, but please feel free to use the chat box to communicate directly with the panelist or the Q&A. So we'll be monitoring that, and we'll present those questions to the presenters at the end of the session. We want to do a little poll as everyone is getting into the webinar, again, to give everyone a little bit of time. So Chelsea is going to go ahead and release that poll. So our question today is, what is considered a selective college acceptance rate? Got a couple choices there. All right, so we're seeing kind of a varied in responses. So about 40% of y'all chose 25 to 50%, about 50% chose 5 to 10%, and about 10% of y'all chose that between 50 and 75%. So we're going to talk more about acceptance rates and what those mean throughout the panel. But kind of more, I was telling our panelists earlier, good old Google told me that what is considered a selective college acceptance rate is between 25 and 50%. But we are going to talk some more about those. I would say that 5 to 10% is probably considered more highly selective. Okay, so we'll talk more about that during the panel. So thank y'all for participating in that. All right. So we want to welcome y'all again today to the webinar. I am Shannon Grimsley. I am the Assistant Director of External Training and Partnerships for the Woodward Hines Education Foundation and the Get to College program. We are recording today's session and we'll send a link to anyone who is registered. For those watching the recording, today's date is September 3rd, 2024, and the material in this webinar is current through the 24-25 school year. In today's session, Selective College Admissions Panel, you will hear from a group of admissions professionals who represent selective colleges, and they're here to answer all of our questions about the Selective College Admissions process. I will now share a little background on Get to College and a few logistics about the webinar before we get started. Get to College is a nonprofit program of the Woodward Hines Education Foundation. We have 3 centers in Mississippi, one in Jackson, one in Ocean Springs, and one in South Haven. And we help parents, students, and high school counselors with all aspects of college planning and financial aid. And all of our services are 100% completely free. In our centers, we offer personalized college counseling appointments where we can talk to students about when to apply for admission and scholarships, help fill out their FAFSA, the free application for federal student aid, or advise on essay writing and interviewing. As we mentioned earlier during the webinar, we cannot see or hear you, but we do ask that you ask us questions through the chat or the Q&A at any time. Chelsea Williams will be monitoring and replying to the Q&A today, and as I said earlier, we will have a time for live Q&A with presenters at the end. I would now like to introduce our guest speakers for the day. Our first speaker is Emily Almus. Emily is Assistant Vice President and Director of Admission at Bowdoin College in Brunswick, Maine. She has worked in admissions at a number of kinds of institutions, including research universities, a law school, and another liberal arts college, and enjoys thinking about how to infuse kindness and calm into the admissions process. She grew up right here in Jackson, Mississippi, and holds degrees from Duke University and Harvard University Graduate School of Education. Welcome, Emily. Our next presenter is Catherine. Catherine Hardy is an Assistant Dean of Admission at Amherst College in Western Massachusetts. She is originally from Sarasota, Florida, and is excited to help students from the Southeast consider what what will make college meaningful to them. She especially enjoys collaborating with Amherst's vibrant first-generation low-income community. Welcome, Catherine. Our last presenter is John Palmer Ray. John Palmer is an Associate Director of Admission at Vanderbilt University and the Admissions Officer for the state of Mississippi. Prior to working at Vanderbilt, he held admissions positions at Belmont University and the University of Mississippi. He is originally from Oxford, Mississippi, and the proud son of two public school educators. John Palmer also leads Vanderbilt's team, which is focused on rural and small town recruitment and engagement. So we are really excited to have you all here today. I am actually going to stop my share of my PowerPoint so that we can all be on the screen here together. Chelsea will actually spotlight you all as we speak. So we're going to kind of start the panel. So we're going to kind of popcorn questions here. So Emily, I'm going to start with you. What does it mean to be a test optional school?
Well, thank you, Shannon, and good morning to all of our attendees. We're thrilled to have you with us today, I know. This is a great question because I think especially in the last few years during and as the pandemic has gone on, a number of schools changed their standardized testing requirements. Some schools like Bowdoin College, where I work, have been test optional for decades. Others, this is a relatively new policy. Still, yet some institutions have returned to other policies around testing. So there's a lot of change happening when it comes to standardized testing out there. A little simply put, standardized test optional schools make standardized testing optional for students. So as your students are applying to a test optional school, they have a choice of whether or not to submit standardized testing like an ACT score or an SAT. If a school says they are test optional, they are truly test optional. So that choice is up to the student, whether they wish to submit that test score. Some students might not even have test scores to submit. Others may feel that their test score is not the best reflection of their talents and achievements and wish not to submit that testing. All of that is really up to the student. Some schools nowadays have returned to a standardized test required policy, while a number of schools, particularly on the West Coast, have even potentially adopted a test-free policy, like the University of California system. So there are different policies out there for each institution, but the one your students might encounter most frequently is test optional. And again, that's when your student has a choice whether or not to submit standardized testing with their application. If your student decides to apply test optional, most colleges and universities, Bowdoin is certainly one of them, have a question in the application that asks your student, do you want to submit standardized testing with your application? Yes or no. The wording might vary depending on school. And that's generally what college admissions offices are going to use to decide whether or not to consider a student's testing if we happen to see that standardized testing somewhere else in the application. So, for example, maybe your school or district requires and mandates that ACT scores are going to be on the transcript, and there's nothing you can do to change that. Your students can still apply test optional. We just use the answer that they provide to us in the application to determine whether or not we consider those scores in our review process of that student.
Thank you so much, Emily. And I was just going to give Catherine and John Palmer, are y'all schools both test optional as well? Okay.
Yes.
They're nodding their head yes, in case they're you can't see them. So for all of you, I guess, if your school is test optional, do you require any supplemental documents for those who do not have a test score on file?
We do not require any supplemental material for test optional students. We simply look at the other parts of their application and weigh them more heavily without those test scores.
Okay. John Palmer?
Yeah, same thing for us. No additional documentation needed for those applicants. So really a holistic review of the application for sure.
And we'll talk more about that in a little bit. Okay, Emily, same thing with y'all. Okay, great. All right. So I think one of the questions that, and it's going to be different for every school, but we hear this as counselors a lot. What if my student doesn't have an ACT score or an SAT score? what are the colleges looking for? And I know this is a big loaded question, but this is what we get. So how would y'all answer that? Catherine, how about we ask you first?
Sure. So one piece of that answer, I'll let other people answer other pieces, but one piece of that answer, I think, is we want to see that a student is academically prepared for our school. So we look for that in a lot of different ways, but a really good way is we look at the school profiles that y'all provide us with, and we say, has the student challenged themselves in their coursework? So not only are they performing well in their classes, but have they taken some of the more rigorous courses that have been available to them at their school, knowing that that is different between every school, and that's why those profiles are so important for us.
So can I ask you just to expand on that high school profile just a little bit more? Because I know we presented on that a couple of years ago, or last year actually, about the importance of a school profile. So anybody can tell me, like, what happens when a school profile is not included in the application? Like, what happens as an admissions counselor for you guys, and how important is that?
If a profile is not included, it does make it more difficult for us to understand the context the students taking their classes in. So it's difficult for us to know, like, if your school offers AP courses and then we don't know how many or which APs are offered. We are taking our best guess, or we are going searching if we have time to see what is offered at this school, to see, is this student really challenging themselves at this school? If they have two APs on their transcript, great. Those might be the two APs offered at the school. That student is doing the most they can. That's amazing. But if we don't know what's offered at the school, we're taking our best guess at the preparation that student has gotten at their school and how much they've pushed themselves at their school.
Yeah, I think on that same note with the high school profile, I think one of the things that counselors kind of worry about is how elaborate does this high school profile have to be? I mean, we've all seen, the four color, trifold. So John Palmer, can you speak to that?
Absolutely. Well, let me absolve you from feeling like you need to be like a graphic designer in any way whenever it comes to your school profile. We're really just looking for some basic information on your school. If you can share just a little bit about your community, provide some kind of context, anything special that's about your community, that's great. But really, we want to know about curriculum. If you can provide grade distribution, that can always be really helpful for schools as well. So it does not need to be some pretty elaborate thing that like a wedding invitation, doesn't need to be anything like that. But if you can just provide some of that basic information about your school, that will be incredibly helpful for us. And those school profiles continue to be more helpful as we have more and more new admissions officers joining the field. Who are learning their territories quickly. One of the first places they can go to learn about your school is to that school profile. So I agree with everything that Catherine mentioned.
Yeah, and I think too, like I was telling somebody when we were talking about that, because you've got a stack of admissions files to read, right? And if you have to stop and make a phone call to figure out grading scale or how many APs are offered, what happens to that file? It kind of gets put to the side, maybe not gotten read at that particular moment. So high school counselors, I think, being a former admissions counselor, having that profile is so important because we're reading these files and it's so nice to have everything at our fingertips. So thank y'all for speaking on that. So while we're kind of talking about that, I think that kind of leads us into, I mean, we've already had the words holistic review mentioned. Catherine, let's go back to you, and can you kind of describe what holistic review means?
Yeah, I think each of our three institutions and a lot of highly selective schools are lucky to be able to have the manpower to be able to do a holistic review. So all that means is when we are reviewing applications, we are truly reading the entirety of the application and we are valuing various aspects of the application. So it is not a scenario where we are looking at GPAs and creating two piles of students. We are reading through and we are trying to get a picture of that student's context and how that student's context plays into the whole application. So we care about those letters of recommendation. We care about the writing that the student is providing us, what they're spending their time in outside of school, how they're contributing to community And that could look a lot of different ways. But it simply means we're valuing the whole application, not simply a transcript or a test score. And we're taking it all into consideration when we're trying to determine who's a good fit for Bowdoin, who's a good fit for Vanderbilt, who's a good fit for Amherst.
So you mentioned the resume. So y'all talked to me, John Palmer talked to me about what a good resume looks like.
Yeah, I agree with Catherine in that there are a lot of ways that a resume can really stand out within a holistic review process. I think you'll find there's some students who kind of have all of the shiny things within their school. So maybe they have those key achievements within the context of your school that show engagement, that show leadership. But we do have a really broad definition of what engagement and leadership looks like for students. So your students who have part-time work, who have shift leads as part of that part-time work, who have significant family responsibilities, the way that students describe that to us can be really, really helpful. I find that that is something that y'all can really assist us in, is kind of pushing students towards, okay, well, you say that you help with brother and sister, taking them to practices and running errands. How many hours a week does that actually look like for you? What types of roles are you doing? Are you kind of the lead of the household for pretty much all afternoon or all evening? So that resume can look a variety of different ways. And same type of thing as far as like formatting goes, we're not nitpicky at all with the way that that resume is formatted. Common Application, of course, has that list of activities that students can input. I really encourage students to pack as much into that list of activities and make sure that they're using that honors and awards section as well to indicate any of those high achievements that they may have through their school. So I think engagement and leadership is how I would define it broadly, but we really push students to think about what that looks like in their lived experience.
So while we're talking about resumes, I just thought about something that I hadn't really put on our list here is, and Emily, I'll let you address this, letters of recommendation. We're talking about the holistic review, we're talking about the resume, we'll talk about the essay in a minute, but talk to me real quick about letters of recommendation.
Sure. So, how many letters, what kinds of letters a school requires may vary institution to institution. But I think the big picture takeaway is in this holistic admissions process at selective institutions, we're trying to understand the student better. What kind of person is this student going to be in our classroom? Not just in terms of their academic potential, their work habits, but also as a classmate, as a student, as someone who we're thinking about the communities we're building on our campuses, and that's often where we can also understand that a bit more better. And so the insights that, if you're a teacher joining us today, the insights you provide are so valuable to us. And if you're a school counselor joining us today, the insights you provide are equally just so important to us as well. Most highly selective institutions require or ask for a letter from a school counselor as well as from at least a teacher. And the perspectives that you offer are truly, I would say, important to our understanding of who this applicant is in that holistic process. I do want to say, though, we also understand that there are immense demands on your time and on your teacher's time. And so the context of the resources in your local school community also go into our understanding of that letter as well. So if you're watching this webinar thinking, I have hundreds of students on my caseload, I might not know a student as well as another in writing that letter or providing that information, that's okay. Actually, that's the most valuable information you can share with us, that understanding. So if you do have the opportunity to write on behalf of a student, your insights on what kind of person they might be on our campus, to the degree that and your ability to tell us about anything particular that would be useful to our understanding of who they are in the classroom or outside of it. We really value those insights. Length is less important than content. Short and sweet, bullet points, however you want to share that information with us is up to you. We are really just focused on your professional assessment, and we really value the thoughts and ideas that you share with us as well.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. So we talked about the holistic review, what they're looking at when they look at the application. So We talked about acceptance rates earlier in our poll question. So Emily, let me just stay with you. And can you define acceptance rate for us and what factors are used, which we've kind of already talked about with holistic review, but what factors are used in deciding who's accepted to your college or university?
Sure. So acceptance rate is the percentage of students who are admitted, sort of divided by or compared to the number of applicants in the applicant pool. So if a college is, admitting 100 students out of a pool of 1,000 or 1,000 out of 10,000, so on and so forth, you can get that acceptance rate. It's math on one level. But I think it also reflects the tough choices that college admissions offices have to make in that we have far more applicants who are lovely, wonderful young human beings that we would love to have on our campuses often, but a limitation of space. Each of our 3 schools here today is different in size, but we all receive far more applicants than unfortunately we have space for on our campuses. And so in that selection process, to what Catherine and John Palmer were both saying earlier, we're looking at all of these different pieces of the student's application to understand in that contextual holistic review, who is this person and how does this person match with what we're seeking for the community we're building on our campus? And getting to know that person through their essays, through their academic achievements and performance as it might be reflected on their transcript or in their application or in their letters of recommendation. We're looking at all of these sources of information, and there are many, there are multitudes of them, to get a picture as best we can of this person and how they might match with that community that we're building on campus. So there's never typically, and every school is a little bit different, so I'm speaking in generalizations and stereotypes here, but there's never typically just one thing that is making that decision. And usually there are far more wonderful young people than we have space for, unfortunately, as well.
Catherine, I'm going to move to you. Why do colleges and universities publish middle 50% numbers, and how are students and families expected to use this information?
I think that part of the help of publishing that information is to give students some guideposts as they're looking at colleges, as they're thinking about creating their college lists and where might be good fits for them. It is never meant to like deter students who believe they're a good fit for a school if they are not at that 50% number. It is meant to like serve as a guidepost for students in thinking about their college selection process. I think that students can use it. I know that the test optional policies, we mean for them to have less stress for students. And I know that it sometimes has the opposite effect of having students say, should I submit scores? Should I not submit scores? I don't know what the right thing to do is. Those middle 50 numbers, I hope help students just in guiding decisions like that. Like, am I near that 50% number or not? That gives me a decision of whether I should submit my test scores or not. That gives me a decision of how many highly selective schools I want to put on my regular decision list and how many selective schools, how it just is meant to help students, give them more full information about how they should be creating their lists. And if they have options in their application, whether they should take those options, go test optional, whatever they should be doing.
Thank y'all so much. So John Palmer, they've looked at acceptance rates. They've looked at, we've talked about holistic review. There's a bunch of different applications out there that students can use to apply. So could you tell us the difference in maybe the institution's application? We've got the common application. We've got the universal college application. We still got the coalition application, right? We got a lot of different applications out there. Talk to us about that.
There are so many applications, and we apologize in advance for the fact that there are these different forms. Kind of the two big players right now really are Common Application and the Coalition application, powered by SCORE. The important thing I think with both of those is institutions that receive those different forms are not going to have a preference in which form that you end up using. So you pick a form that works best for you, kind of encourage students to pick the form that works best for them and the format that works best for them, and then submit it over. If we do have anyone who's in a school that may have a system that connects well over to Common App or Coalition, I know that that can really help you on the high school side of things as well. And do want to address, Shannon, I know you mentioned there are some schools that have institution-specific applications as well. Vanderbilt does not, but I've worked at some institutions that do. And it's, again, just kind of another way that you can share that same information with us. So I find that the vast majority of our students are applying through the Common Application. They're definitely kind of the largest at this point. But just different ways that you can get the same information over to us, essentially.
And the beauty of the Common Application and some of these applications like that is a student can apply to a lot of different schools at one time. So they can put in one application and it goes to, gosh, how many institutions are Common App now? 500 and something?
I think
More
there's
than-
over 1,000
over
actually. Don't
1,000.
quote
Okay,
me, that might not be correct, but I
I
think
know,
it's
I
over
should have looked
1,000.
that up. Yeah, absolutely. All right, so we've got all these applications, Emily.
Mhm.
But we also have all these different admissions plans.
Sure.
So can you talk to us about, I think the two that we hear most common are early decision and early action. And so can you
Sure.
define those kind of in, I know you said you're speaking for the masses and it's different for every school, but kind of in common terms. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I did want to just build on something John Palmer said, if that's okay. The three of us also happen to be QuestBridge partner schools. So you might also hear the QuestBridge application. We can talk a little bit more about that later, but that also might be a round or an application type that might be of note to some of your students, particularly if you're working with students who are first in their family to attend college and or low income students. So just throwing that out there as well. But in terms of early action and early decision, they're both a matter of timing. We'll start there, right? And again, yes, the caveats, I'm speaking generally, and they're different varieties, and every school might do it a little bit differently, but big picture, sort of common terms here. Early action is an early notification application round. Typically, it is not binding. So if a student applies early action, they have a choice generally of whether or not to enroll at an institution. Oftentimes, the deadlines are some point in the fall. It might be October or November, depending on the school, with notification typically in maybe December or sometimes January. So that's usually when people refer to early action, what they're talking about. And some schools may put restrictions on that or have different policies about which kinds of schools you can also apply to, whether it's just one or more than one, so on and so forth. But that would be usually what someone's referring to when they mean early action. Early decision, which is the decision path that Bowdoin uses, and I believe Vanderbilt and Amherst as well, is a binding single choice early notification round. And what that means is that your student applies by a specific date, in November in our case, or in January. We actually have two rounds, but I'll get into that in a minute. And they hear back a few weeks later if they've been admitted, or they might have another outcome. They might be not offered admission, or they might be deferred to the regular round. But if a student's admitted, they've committed to coming as part of that application process. In the application for early decision, generally and usually there's an additional form that you as a school counselor may be asked to sign, and a student's parent or guardian or family member may also be asked to sign in addition to the student, saying you understand the commitment that you're making and applying under a binding round, that if you're admitted, you're coming. So early decision, oversimplified, usually early notification and a binding commitment. Early action, again, oversimplified, usually an early notification, but not binding, usually in that case as well. And some schools, like Bowdoin, and I think Vanderbilt might be in this boat as well, have more than one round of early decision. So we have an early decision in November deadline, and then we have a deadline also in January. That's about timing and calendar. The sort of policy and process is the same all the way through. Some schools might just have one round of early decision. I think Amherst falls into that camp. So the timing and the rounds involved might vary, but it's about that commitment. Early decision can be a great choice for students who know in their heart of hearts that they really want to be at a specific institution and are ready to make that commitment at a certain time in the process. But students shouldn't feel obligated to apply early decision if for whatever reason that's not the right choice for them. So a student who needs to compare financial aid packages, for example, they might be better suited to non-binding options, or a student who's just not sure or not ready. Students hopefully don't feel a pressure to apply early decision, but rather the students who know or think it might be a good choice for them have that option available to them.
Thank you so much. And you kind of hit on there's different types of early decision, early action. So there's, like she said, there can be an early decision one, an early decision two, an early action one. So, and you mentioned some words, Emily, within that conversation that, some of us on this webinar are kind of first timers with working with selective colleges. So we all know what admitted is. We all know what denied is. But Catherine, I'm going to throw this one over to you, kind of impromptu. Um, Explain to us, kind of again in general terms. We know each institution is a little bit different, but waitlist and deferred. Sometimes folks don't understand that.
Sure. So if a student applies an early decision or through an early action plan, um, even sometimes if we won't even get into QuestBridge at this moment, but their application may be deferred into a later round. So if they apply an early decision, they may get a deferred letter, which says that institution's simply going to consider their application again within their regular decision pool. And after that regular decision reading happens, when we release, the student will then be admitted or denied after that regular decision round. So it's a little bit of a punt into the next round for that college application. If a student is waitlisted, that is after a regular decision round. They may get a letter from us in mid-March saying you are on the wait list for Amherst College. And what we would really want students to be doing in that position is be weighing all of their options that are available to them and continue moving forward with the admittance letters that they have received. They have to be planning with the admittances that they have received. They should not be sitting and waiting to hear about a waitlist decision. If a student is taken off the waitlist and are admitted to a school, they will hear from us typically via phone, via email, that they have been admitted. It will be later down the line. And we do try to be in contact with our waitlisted students at a given point to say, we have closed our waitlist, or so that students can kind of move on and consider and get excited about the other options that they have at their fingertips.
And I'm asking this for me, and because I do have parents say, my student was waitlisted. Is there any way for them to find out where they are in position on the wait list, or do colleges give that information out? I just don't know.
I can't speak for every college. I know at Amherst, the answer is no. If a student is very interested in attending a school that they are waitlisted at, a big piece of advice that I would give to those students is to write an email in, write a letter in to the admission office stating like, I am so excited about this school. Here are the reasons why, or here is why I believe I would excel at your school, because that does give the school a little tip off, a little eye to the fact that, oh, this student is really excited about us, is still considering us. And if they're not, that's great. We're glad that they're excited about the other places that they've been admitted to. They should feel free to also reach out to us and say, no, thanks. Like, I'm excited about my pathway.
Awesome. So John Ray, that kind of goes over to the next question that I was going to ask. So let me ask you first, if somebody calls into Vanderbilt and says, my student's on the wait list, can you tell me where they are on the wait list, how likely they are to be admitted? How much of that information are y'all able to give, or can y'all give that information?
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what Catherine mentioned. I think maybe a helpful turn of phrase rather than wait list is to think of it as a wait pool. I hear people use that phrase sometimes. It's maybe not necessarily a list of, Emily's number one, Catherine's number two, John Palmer's number three, but rather in the spirit of a holistic review, it is more of a pool of students that the university has options to kind of choose from overall. But absolutely, I think sharing that student has continued interest in that institution, and if they'd like to stay on the wait list, is the best advice that y'all can give to students that you're working with.
Because I think that's what we kind of envision as people on the outside, like, right, that we've got number one, and if number one says no, I'm no longer interested, I'm going to go to number two, right? So that's very interesting to know. So that goes into my next question. We hear a lot about demonstrated interest. We hear that. I'm not sure that our students or our counselors or our teachers understand exactly what that means. So John Ray, tell us a little bit about demonstrated interest, how that's used and what colleges are looking at with that.
Absolutely. Demonstrated interest is generally what a prospective student, the types of engagement a prospective student will have with a college or university to show that they're interested in that school. I know Vanderbilt, we do not track demonstrated interest. I'm not sure if y'all do either. Typically, schools that do track demonstrated, I see head shakings. No, just for y'all to know in case you can't see. Typically, schools that do track demonstrated interest may have somewhere where they let you know that they will track demonstrated interest. And that could be anything as simple as sending an email over to that institution's admissions office, engaging with any messages that are sent over to them via text or via email, maybe going on a visit to those schools, engaging with the admissions officer if they're coming to your area as well. But there's some collection of schools, I do think it is getting maybe a little bit smaller and smaller with each year, that will track demonstrated interest. And the idea is that is then a factor that they can use within their admissions process a little bit later to have an understanding of if a student is interested or not in their institution. I will mention, kind of tying things back to our decision plan, things that we were mentioning earlier. Applying early decision is essentially the most ultimate demonstrated interest that you can share with an institution, right? By sharing, this is where I want to go. I want to attend that school if I'm admitted for that upcoming year. So that's maybe a way to kind of flip the idea of traditional idea, if you will, of demonstrated interest.
Yeah, so along those lines, just I'm kind of trying to go with flow of the interview here. Some colleges will ask that your student come and do an interview, either on campus or with alumni in the area. So it might be, hey, I live in Jackson, Mississippi, and some alumni from Vanderbilt are going to come and do an interview with me. Do any of y'all schools participate in those types of interviews? No. Okay.
So Bowdoin does offer interviews. We don't ask students to complete them. They're an option for students to elect to complete them. And part of that is our hope that students sort of have an opportunity to get to know Bowdoin better. Something that we care about deeply about in our process is, does a student understand why Bowdoin might be a good match, right? So a student who says, I'm looking for an extremely large university in a major metropolitan center, Bowdoin's not that place. And that's great. That's great. They're looking for that, but that's also not who we are. So we offer totally optional, not required opportunities to interview with alumni or on campus or with an alum, or excuse me, virtually. And they're one option of many. Some students elect to take advantage of that because they have questions too, which is always why I encourage students to think about it. And some students don't, but it's truly optional. So it's not something that we ask students to do. It's just an option that we provide to students if they wish to do so. And I do think that schools that offer interviews, it can be another source of information for us to get to know the student, but more importantly, I would say for your students to get to know the institutions that they're considering. So if a school does offer those, it might be something, one of many different kinds of sources of information your students might use to learn more about a specific place.
And so we're kind of touching on this. Some schools will also maybe give some extra, I don't want to say extra points, but extra consideration for students who visited campus. I know your institutions might not particularly do anybody, does that does not come into the admissions decision. So some schools, though, just know that some schools will actually give some extra consideration to students who've actually visited campus. So that's why I kind of wanted to bring that up. Their schools do not. That's certainly a question that your students can ask. If does visiting campus, does that give me extra consideration, in the application process? Because there are some schools that do that, along with that demonstrated interest that John Palmer mentioned. They may say, and we tell students all the time, just because they say demonstrated interest, that does not mean that you have to call or text your admissions counselor every week or every day. Okay, so because they might flip it on its head the other way, right? Like if you're a little bit too worrisome, our admissions folks want to hear from you, but not just for the purpose of, oh, they said demonstrated interest, I better call them or text them or email them like every day. No, we have to be a little bit careful with that. So we did want to mention those types of things and how that they happen. So now I kind of want to move into the scholarship and financial aid portion of this, because I do think that that's a really important question. That's one that students all over the country, of course, are interested in is cost and scholarships and things of that nature. But I think especially our students in Mississippi, that's one of the things we really consider. So many times we all know on paper that selective colleges or highly selective colleges or semi-selective colleges or liberal arts colleges or whatever it may be have a higher price tag. So I want to ask all three of y'all to answer this question as briefly as you can, but what types of scholarships and or financial aid or grants do you offer? So Catherine, we'll start with you.
Sure. So Amherst, our jargon that we use is we are a need blind institution, which if a school is need blind, it means they're not looking at a student's financial information in the admission process. They're admitting students who are a good fit, not students who can necessarily most afford the school. Once we have admitted our pool of students in that need blind process, we promise to meet full demonstrated need without packaging loans as part of the financial aid offer. So all of our financial aid comes in the form of grants and scholarships and a little bit of work study. If families need access to loans, we can certainly help them access those, but we have very generous need-based financial aid that goes for US citizens, non-citizens, at Amherst. We do not offer merit aid at Amherst. So there are no athletic scholarships. There's no academic scholarships. Our aid is generous, but is entirely need-based.
Perfect, thank you. Emily.
Everything that Catherine just said about Amherst also applies to Bowdoin. We are also need blind for all applicants and meet full demonstrated need without loans for all students as well. I will put a little plug if it's okay, Shannon. There's a website called myintuition.org. Actually, all three of our schools and many others are part of that website. And it's a simplified cost calculator or net price estimator calculator. And I always encourage students and families to, consider looking at each individual institution, of course, but also something like My Intuition. I think sometimes students and families are surprised at how they may qualify for need-based financial aid. So don't rule that out, or don't have your students and their families rule that out as well, because that's a quick way that they can see at a number of different kinds of institutions, including happening to be all three of ours, what their financial need might mean in terms of a need-based financial aid award. But I will turn things over to John Palmer, because I know Vanderbilt has a little bit different as well.
Yeah, thanks. And I can't agree more on the My Intuition kind of plug. I think especially for students who are kind of towards the beginning of their process, and maybe you're just searching schools, that's like maybe what, 50 or 60 schools I think are on My Intuition. And it can be so helpful just to sit and click from one school to another and watch your students' minds get blown a little bit with the amount of aid that may be available to them. At Vanderbilt, similar to what my colleagues were sharing, we are need blind for students. We do meet 100% of demonstrated financial need, no loans within our financial aid packages. I can speak to the merit scholarship side of things as well. We do offer a fairly sizable amount of merit scholarships for the size institution that we are, but they are still competitive. They are at full tuition merit-based scholarships that do have a separate application from the regular application for admission. So as we always share with our students, important to keep their deadline ducks in a row, so to speak, that they're keeping everything in mind. But we do offer those separate merit scholarships. They all have a separate essay. There's one that's kind of a general scholarship, and then two that are a little bit more specialized towards students that maybe have a focus in business or service or social justice and equity. So You'll find that there aren't a ton of selective institutions that do offer merit scholarships, but generally, as Emily and Catherine have shared, some of these selective institutions may be way more affordable for your students than they initially recognize, just based off of the generous need-based financial aid that's available.
So I'm glad you said that, because we do find that, a lot of your selective colleges don't offer merit-based, but they have a great deal of need-based aid. So really quickly, just again, we have to remember some of our folks are kind of starting with ground zero with some of our terminology. Somebody really quickly tackle need blind for me. Give me a definition.
I can mention it. Need blind just means that we do not have any knowledge of the student's income, family, like anything that has to do with money with the student is not viewed at within the application process. So we have no idea of the student's kind of quote unquote ability to pay for our institution.
Perfect, thank you. And for those merit-based scholarships that you mentioned, John Palmer, I know when I worked at a semi-selective institution, we did have on-campus, in-person interviews for those scholarships. Is that a part of your scholarship process, or is it just that application and separate essay?
We do have an interview process where we'll invite a really small number of the finalists to campus, usually sometime right in the middle of winter. I think you'll find with your students, most of those interview scholarship times are going to be sometime after the holiday break, usually January, February, sometime along those lines.
Perfect. All right, so I want to move into very quickly to round us out. We've got about 10 minutes left. We've talked about the admissions portion, the need blind, and of course, these folks are not financial aid officers, but working at small liberal arts institutions or selective institutions. I know you all have to have a understanding of things such as the CSS profile, your financial aid office, the FAFSA. So let's see, Emily, tell us what the CSS profile is and how selective colleges use that.
Sure. So the CSS profile is a financial aid form that is offered by the College Board that a number of institutions use. I believe all three of us, John Palmer. Yep. Okay, great. That all three of our colleges and many others use to help determine a student and family's ability to pay their financial need. It provides more detailed information than the FAFSA, the free application for federal student aid, might, and also different kinds of information beyond what the FAFSA may capture. The benefit this past year and the coming year and maybe in the short-term future is that because our schools require this form, which I do not in any way mean to underestimate the amount of time and energy that students, families, and counselors put into completing that form. We are so grateful. But the benefit to that and that use of that form this past year and in the future is that we are not held up by the FAFSA or its delays or technical issues in issuing initial financial aid awards to students. So this past year and our anticipation moving forward as well, we are able to issue a financial aid award letter to students when they're admitted to our colleges, whether that's an early decision or regular decision and so forth, without worrying in the short term about that FAFSA form. Most of us still require students to submit that form, the FAFSA form ultimately. And, should a student qualify for, say, something like a Pell Grant, that will be officially coming through the FAFSA form once that process happens. But we know, especially this year, all of you school counselors and others, advisors, coaches, the FAFSA completion process was a very challenging and delayed one for you and your students and families. And while we are all optimistic and hopeful that this coming year we'll see some improvements, just some reassurance from those schools like ours that require the CSS profile form. And that's the official name now. Originally, it was an acronym for something else, but just remember CSS profile. That form will give us that additional information that helps us understand a student and family's financial picture for that financial aid award.
Okay, and Emily, there's a cost for the CSS profile, right? But are there waivers for students? for the CSS
There is a
profile?
cost and there are absolutely waivers. So there are different ways that a student can get a waiver. They can get a waiver directly from the College Board, depending on their circumstances. If that's a challenge, they can also ask schools for a waiver. Schools can also help provide a waiver for students. I'm going to go out on a limb here, but say that any school that's requiring the CSS profile, I imagine will help a student and family figure out a way to get that to us, because we want to make sure we have that great information so that we can be financially accessible to a student.
Great, thank you. I just wanted to put that out there because I know ACT, there's ACT waivers out there too, guys. You all know about that. So there's ACT waivers, but wanted folks to know that since there is a cost for that CSS profile, that there is a cost. And like you said, most people will be willing to help you get that in. So you did mention, Emily, in your dialogue about the challenges that we've had with the FAFSA over the last year. And believe you me, all of us that get to college have been knee deep in that all year long. So how have you mentioned your school's using the CSS profile to kind of move things along? Anyone else have something that's kind of been unique to your school, how you've been moving that process along throughout these kind of trying FAFSA times? And do y'all require the FAFSA? Does everybody require the FAFSA? So if you apply to these schools and probably other selective schools, they're probably going to say you have to complete a FAFSA. Okay.
So I think, like Emily said, for schools that require the CSS profile, we're in luck in that it is impacting us, but we're able to provide students their letters, even though the FAFSA was a mess this last year. We were able to get students letters on time because we're basing it off the information that we have in those CSS profiles. And I just wanted to add in a little financial aid access information, just because I taught in high schools for 10 years and I didn't know this information while I taught in high schools, and I wish I had. One piece of access, someone asked in the Q&A about STARS and QuestBridge and how, and earlier you asked, like, does it hurt a student if they haven't been to campus before? No, that is an equity issue. That is an access issue. We know not every student can get to our campuses. And all of our schools and lots of highly selective schools offer what are called fly-in programs. So I just wanted to throw that out to teachers and counselors. If you have a junior student who is considering this, or you think might be a good fit for one of these schools, but isn't sure if they would fit in on that campus, isn't sure if they're ready to move far away from home, these fly-in programs are fully funded. We get students to our campuses, they go to our classes, they stay in our dorms, and it's just a way for students, whether they're kind of STAR students in those rural areas or from Jackson and just haven't thought about going to a faraway school before. It's a way for them to see, is this for me? Is this a good fit for me? Am I excited by this? So I just wanted to float those fly-in programs as we talk about financial aid and access, because I think teachers and counselors are our biggest help in getting students to think about those kinds of questions.
And I think those that are involved in QuestBridge and STARS and these other programs that you guys are involved in, I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that you guys would be willing to talk to any of our folks here on this webinar about those programs kind of offline and what that can offer. But one thing, I attended a breakfast last week with Emily and some other schools that are similar in nature to her school. Amherst was there. What I heard was your schools want students from Mississippi. We want our Mississippi students looking at different types of schools. There's sometimes barriers there. Y'all, these guys are really committed to removing those barriers for any student. I will say that. I sat at a breakfast table with 6 of them. I know Vanderbilt's the same way. A lot of other institutions, they are really, really committed to that. And look at diversity. Colleges look at diversity in lots of different ways, right? Geographic diversity being one of them, right? Like our college students learn from one another, right? So if we're all the same and we're all from the same place, we're not, essentially having that learning experience that we can have from our classmates. So there's so much more we could ask, and I want to give time for questions, but really quickly, I'm going to give all three of you a 1 minute um, time frame here to kind of talk to us. It could kind of be twofold, but how is the educational experience different maybe at maybe like a small liberal arts school or a selective university or a smaller institution? And really quickly give us something that you love to brag about your institution, a distinctive strength for your institution that you're really proud of. So John Palmer, we'll start with you.
Happy to go first. I think one of the strengths that we find with Vanderbilt is that it's a great fit for a student who really enjoys this idea of balance. They love really pushing themselves for kind of high heights in the academic sense. They love their academics, but they also still want to be kind of a regular college student. And the layout of Vanderbilt really presents that for students. We believe that we're a good balance of some of that liberal arts school strength, but also of a leading research institution within a city like Nashville that's vibrant, growing, exciting to be in, but still small enough to be able to get around the city as well. So for a student who's looking for kind of that balance in all of those different ways, that can be Vanderbilt can be a great fit for that type of student. And I'll just mention on the piece of kind of the difference between a selective college and public institution and whatnot, any school that you're looking at could be a great fit for you. There's nothing better about a selective institution or better about a public institution. I think engaging with those schools, whether that is Zooming with someone, if you are able to get to a campus, that can always help as well. That can help you really get a sense of the feel for the campus, and that ultimately can guide your students in deciding what type of school may be a good fit for them. So Emily, do you want to go next?
Sure. So Bowdoin College, a fun little reminder, our name rhymes with exploding knowledge. I always love to tell students that. It's a fun way to remember it. And it's also a nice mental image of all the cool things happening across our campus. We're about half an hour north of Portland, Maine, a community of about 2,000 students, liberal arts college. And I like to say that some of the things that really are differentiating, one is the commitment to the common good on our campus. So our students are thinking about how, whether as a student or beyond, they can make the world a better place, no matter what they end up going into, the corporate world, nonprofit life, whatever it might be, that sense that we have a mission as an institution and as an alum. I would also say kindness and curiosity are deeply embedded in our community. So how people treat one another, how our alumni think about their time at the college, and the breadth of academic exploration that's truly encouraged within this beautiful setting in coastal Maine. So I think I used up my 1 minute already. There's plenty more. Should you have any questions about any of our colleges specifically here today, I know we all welcome your questions and outreach at any point. And Catherine, we'll head to Western Massachusetts.
Thank you. So Amherst College is a liberal arts college of about 1,900 students in Western Massachusetts. We're in a small town setting, but we have 5 colleges and universities within 10 miles of us here. So we do have a consortium of schools, so students can really make their experience feel as kind of small as the 1,900 students or big as the 33,000 undergraduate students that we have in our area. The other kind of selling point that I think makes Amherst unique is we have an open curriculum. So if you have a student who wants to go pre-med and wants to study biology, but also loves theater and dance, amazing. It is relatively easier to do both things at a high level at a school with an open curriculum. So thank you for the time to tell about our institutions.
You're so welcome. Thank y'all for being here today. Like I said, we could go into like a million questions. So speaking of questions, anything, I know y'all were kind of looking at those as we went along. Anything pertinent, Chelsea, that we did not get to? Even if we go over, I think it's important to answer these questions real quick.
Yeah, absolutely. So they did answer a few questions in the chat. So I believe you guys can see that if you go to the answer tab of the Q&A. But we do have 2 questions that they did not get to. The first one is, a lot of students wonder if they are at a disadvantage if they don't submit their test scores relative to those who do. So is there a disadvantage there? I know that may be a common thought process amongst a lot of our students. So if one of you guys can speak to that.
Sure. When we say we're test optional, we're truly test optional. What we are looking for is the pieces of information that help us understand a student's academic preparation for the college. So there's no advantage or disadvantage about testing, but I do encourage students to think about where we get sources of information about their academic preparation for our institutions. So truly test optional, not a disadvantage, but additional context probably helpful.
Absolutely, perfect. The next question, last question, is do you recommend a student reapply to your institution if they were not accepted their freshman year?
I'm already off mute, so I can take this one again. I think the challenge of selective or highly selective institutions is that there are unfortunately, more applicants than we have space for. And so I always encourage students to get excited about the institutions that they're at. All of our schools accept transfer students in various formats and in various ways, and each school is going to be a little bit different. So if that's an option that someone's eager to pursue, they can always have your student look that information up. When it comes to first year admission, those would be students coming following high school graduation. Once a student has enrolled elsewhere, they're probably looking at having to apply or needing to apply as a transfer student. And so I think this is one of those places where, a good conversation with that student about what they're hoping to get out of their college experience and sort of what are the elements of a college experience they're looking for might be the right tack versus necessarily applying again.
And that was all we had, Shane.
Okay. Great question, Joel. I could spend like hours talking about these kinds of things. This is like my happy place is talking about college admissions. So it's such a fun and intriguing world, I think. So thank you all for spending time with us today. And most of all, thank you for being interested in our students from Jackson and from Mississippi. When I tell you all these folks have reached out to us and said, how can we help students in Mississippi? And they all have a very pure heart when it comes to that. And we just really, really appreciate that because you don't have to do that. And I will tell you, all three of these folks are doing this out of a pure heart and a love for their institution and a love for diversity, for I cannot speak, diversity for their institution. So, so very quickly, just wanted to let everyone here know that we will share this recording at the end of the webinar. We will send that on to you through your email, and then we will also post it on YouTube. So you can go back and watch it at any time. If you have a colleague that says, man, or you are watching and you have a colleague and you say, man, this was great information, you can share that with them, and we will put that on YouTube as well. So very, very quickly, I want to respect everyone's time as it is almost 11 o'clock. But just wanted to go over, today was our second session of our Fall Topic Tuesday series. So stay tuned for our next webinar, which will be Tuesday, October the 1st, and we'll be giving you all the much anticipated MAP, the Mississippi application, and 2025-26 FAFSA update. So this is always one of our most anticipated webinars of the year. So we will give you as much update as we have there. And then you can see all of our other webinars that we'll be offering throughout the fall and spring. And if you participate in 5 webinars, you'll have the opportunity to apply for 0.5 CEUs. And if you participate in all 10, then you'll get the opportunity to apply for 1 full CEUs. So we'll cover things such as ACT updates, college applications, and many other things throughout the fall and spring. So we hope that y'all will join us for the remainder of these. They are all listed under the educator header on our Get to College website, and then select Topic Tuesday under the events section. While you're there registering, also check out all of our other resources for you and your students that are listed under that educator tab. We're going to have lots of training opportunities for educators over the 24-25 school year, and we hope that y'all will register for as many of those as possible. Speaking of those, just very quickly, we've got a few MDE Get to College regional trainings offered in September and November. So those are coming up next week and the next. And then we have also next week, training is going to be real busy next week. We have college access educator trainings at all 3 of our centers. So those times are there and all listed on the website. So do get registered for those as soon as possible. We'd love to have as many folks as possible in those trainings next week. So Ocean Springs the 10th and Jackson the 11th and South Haven on the 12th. So those are coming up soon. And then we'll have some virtual FAFSA trainings. So for those of you who can't see us in person, we have 5 virtual FAFSA trainings in the fall and spring. And then we're taking it one step further this year, and we're going to offer a virtual FAFSA 201 training where we'll dive more into FAFSA submission summaries, assets, some of the things that we don't always have time to really delve into in that FAFSA 101 training. And then we'll have in-person FAFSA training. So we'd love for you to join us in person. I do think in person is always best, but you do have those virtual options. And then we're going to travel all over the state in October, hitting every corner of the state with those in-person FAFSA trainings. So we'll be at the centers and all across the state. So we know y'all are pumped and excited to learn more about the FAFSA. So we hope to see you for one of those. Again, you can contact us at any time. We will let you all know really quickly. Presenters, this is the last minute thing. Can you drop your email in the chat really, really quickly? I should have asked you to do that before. And we'll give those who are interested in staying on the opportunity to grab your email. All right, so they're putting their emails in the chat. All right, actually, I think Chelsea on the back end there, I think it deferred to host and panelists. So if we can swap that
Yes, I will
to
swap that.
everybody. Okay, Chelsea will copy those for y'all very quickly. And we'll have those to send out as well in the email. So thank you all. Again, we can't thank you enough. And we're jealous for those of you in Maine and Massachusetts for your fall-like weather that is soon approaching. John Palmer, I am sure that it's not quite so cool in Nashville, and I can assure you it is not in Mississippi. So y'all have a great fall, and hopefully you will hear from some of our Mississippi educators very soon. So thank you, and everybody have a great day.